The agony of trying to be somebody you're not. Often I notice a kind of a stuck feeling, as I mentioned before, like tension within, conflicting feelings and conflicting behaviour, or an acting out of behaviour from the emotional conflicting issues. So, the agony can present itself in many ways, in my experience, whether it's through self-medication, through drugs, through drink, through sex addiction, through low self-esteem, through depression, through anxiety. People often internalize and recreate past experiences which then impede further future development. Who is Ben? Ben is a sum of many parts, as most of us are. I'm very passionate about people and change and connecting with people and assisting them in finding their authentic self and freeing the tension that we've kind of already mentioned. And I know that through my work and through what I do and how I engage with people, it's a constant developmental process for me, and that's something I relish, and I feel very privileged to have that as such a consistent thing in my life on a day-to-day basis. It is wonderful. It's about my development, it's about other people's development, and it's hard to describe it so specifically, because it's kind of being creative, and it's understanding what's happening between two people when you're in the room, and being able to identify what's mine and what's theirs, and how I can use that to develop them. And I also, as I said, get some development myself out of that, which supports the whole process. It's a collaboration. It's not it's not about one person having all the answers. And often when people sit down and say, okay, this is my issue, what are you going to do? I say, I have no fucking idea. I don't have a clue. And they don't usually get up and leave. I don't think it's happened yet. But it's the beginning of the work, and it's partly about me taking responsibility for who I am and what I can actually deliver, and encouraging and inviting the other person to take responsibility for who they are and to invest themselves in our relationship, because the relationship is the vehicle for growth, and that's the object of my work and how I work and how we work at the Grove. It's so important, those little things, and I think often people are looking for this big eureka moment, and actually change is about process, and process is about small steps, and it's the small steps that makes the biggest difference. And I think the way that we work at the Grove, it's about developing the relationship. So you move people through relationship. You're sharing something quite intimate and deep with them, and it allows them to kind of change shape, because they don't stay in their rigid roles that they've been in, these boxes, this prison of musts, that they start to touch other elements of themselves, which helps to move them. And the saying that I love is, if you let go of what you are, you become what you might be. And I think that really describes well kind of what we aim for at the Grove, and what we're doing, and how we do it. I think a lot of this process is about unfinished business and people processing stuff that they haven't been able to process because it was either too overwhelming, or they didn't have the resources, or they didn't have the right support system, and that really can be limiting. And once that happens, and it happens frequently, I think, in sessions, as I said, it's not big eureka moments, it's generally small pieces of work that create the bigger picture. I had a really interesting American woman that I was seeing once, and she was talking about her anger and her problems, and I said to her, so tell me about your sex life. And she said, well, I don't see how that's going to help me with my emotional issues. And she couldn't comprehend. And I said to her, you know, the thing about sex and sexuality is that sex is our relationship to the world expressed through the language of the body. And often in our sexual activity or our relationship with sex, you can identify patterns of behaviour and thoughts that be relevant kind of targets for the therapeutic work. You know, and again, you have to really create a safe environment if you're going to expect or ask and invite someone to talk about their sexuality, their fantasies, you know, how they feel about their sexuality. So it's really important to build a real holding, containing, safe environment in order to facilitate that process. It can be fun, and there's moments. When Sarah was speaking just now, I just had this this memory of being with a client, and she was a very high functioning, successful woman, and we had lots of kind of, you know, deep conversation, and she left one session. She came back the following week and she said, "I've had a breakthrough," and I was like, "Fantastic! Tell me about it." And she said it was that moment in the session, you know, when you did that, and I was sitting there in anticipation, thinking, "Wow, I've done something brilliant. What was it? What was it? She's going to tell me." And she said, "You know, when you said that, Ben," and I was sitting there and I was kind of, "Yeah, just say it. What did I do? What did I do that was so good?" And she went, "You said that I was pissing in the wind." And you know, from that small sentence, and it was just where we were in something, and I said, the reality is, you know, you're pissing in the wind. And she took that and she made something with it, and she came back and she had a major breakthrough because something was reflected to her that she wasn't aware of. You know, she wasn't kind of aware of it internally or conscious of it, and she became conscious of it, and it completely freed something up. So I think it just shows the kind of the power of how we can internalize something and not make sense of it, and then be fearful to look at it or to ask others about it because of judgment or rejection or embarrassment. Yet something so simple can facilitate such a major process, and that's not to be sniffed at. Sometimes I hear that giggle and I just like, I'm overwhelmed with warmth. Like, see?
There's a lot of money in that giggle.
Therapy can be fun. I've just got this phrase in my head that is, you know, those who control others may be powerful, but those who master themselves are mightier still. And
are exquisite.
And are exquisite, you know, because if you master yourself, then there's nothing you can't do. And mastering yourself is knowing yourself, and that's what happens in a therapeutic relationship. You know, you get to know yourself because you have an objective person sitting with you that has no ulterior motive other than to reflect back to you, which means that you get feedback that can really benefit and enhance your understanding. Because we all walk around thinking all of this stuff about ourselves that we're not sure about, but we're too afraid and fearful to ask in case we're judged. So, you know, if you can go somewhere where it's safe and it's contained, and you can develop a relationship of trust, and someone can give you honest feedback, although it may be hard to hear, is really beneficial and useful for change, for implementing change, and often it can unblock blockages. And often what happens is that we don't like a part of ourselves, so we push it away. You know, we pretend it doesn't exist. And then what happens is that part does not grow because it doesn't get nurtured. You know, it's a little bit like putting a plant in a cupboard. It may survive, but it won't flourish. And if you disown a part of yourself, or you don't accept a part of yourself, then you may survive, but guess what? You won't flourish. You know, that phrase comes to my mind about you give a man, what is it? You teach a man.
Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day.
That's it.
Or so there's a third evolution now, which is give a man a fishing rod, you get rid of him for the whole weekend.
That's even better. I don't know, you know, it's not just about what I'm going to give you, because in this situation, the more you put in, the more you're going to get out. So I will take responsibility for my role, but you must take responsibility for yours. And if you're not getting enough out of that, then that's something that we would need to look at. I had a breakdown in a long-term relationship, and I was leaving my partner and my 2 children. And I had my first meeting with a therapist, and it felt very strange and very kind of unusual to be sitting with someone I didn't know and talking about myself and my problems. But I found it really, really useful, and there was actually a pivotal moment that got me into therapy and interested in development, and that was, I was sitting there and I said to the therapist, you know, I'd do anything for my children. And he looked at me and he said, well, that's not actually true, is it? Because you wouldn't stay with your partner for them. And I nearly got off the chair and gave him a right hook. But I sat with my anger, and I left there and I was furious. And I was so angry, and I was like, how dare he? Who does he think he is? And I was angry because he was right. And that was a turning point for me, because I had to take responsibility for the reality, and the reality was that. And from that moment, I became very, very interested in development. I started reading a lot more. And then I was actually encouraged by my therapist to do a training. So I went on a year training, an introductory course, and I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it, but it was also pretty terrifying. And then from there I just got more and more involved and did my psychotherapy training and lots of additional training since then. But that was my gateway into the profession and my gateway into the understanding of how therapy works, how it can work. And it's been such a huge beneficial thing for me, and it's completely turned my life around. I can tell you some stories, Alan. Another time.
I look forward to it.